All right,
All right.
welcome to the NX1 podcast. I'm Keaton,
I'm JR,
and
and
we're here to talk about NIL and
yeah, that's
sports.
what we're about. NIL sports and about all your guys' stories in the near future. That's what we hope to do on this podcast starting around episode 3 or 4. But for now, this podcast and our next one's basically just going to be going over our backstory, why we're doing this, why we're here, why we're so passionate about NIL and sports. And I mean, let's just get straight into it, Keaton.
All right, so yeah, I think really talking about who we are. Um,
Yeah.
my
I,
my
I'll let
I'm
you go
from.
for it
You
first.
you want me to go first?
Yeah, you go for it.
Okay. So yeah, I'm from a small town in Wisconsin. Um, yeah, I mean that's it. I've always played soccer. Love sports, and yeah, I love what we're doing. But that's pretty much that all there is to me. I mean, obviously me and Jay are roommates, so in college, and
But
we're
like
just following a dream.
what sparked that like entrepreneurial spirit that like you really wanted to like create your own venture in sports? Because like we know you're all about sports, but what made you want to start something new?
Yeah. Uh, well, it was really just a realization that I didn't really want to work for somebody.
Yeah.
Especially like I just never wanted to be the guy who worked a 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
I also am just like I don't know. I like to make calls and take shot like you know what I mean? Like I don't like
Yeah.
to follow people's direction all the time. So to be able to make your own decisions is pretty cool. But yeah, no, that's really why I wanted to do it. I also have always just been a problem solver, so and being able to help people, I think that's really the biggest reason why I want to be an entrepreneur is just for that reason. All right, you want to
100%.
get into yours?
Can't agree with you more. All right. So, obviously, I'm JR, guys, and grew up in Los Angeles, California all my life. Played basketball, soccer, a little bit of baseball in kindergarten. That's about where that left off. But I grew up playing all sorts of sports, elementary, middle school. And then in high school, genetics weren't really on my side, but I picked up motorsport. And for all of you who don't really know what that is, it's kind of like you see those Formula One cars and NASCAR. We call karting like the bottom level of that. So I was big into that. Took a little bit of convincing to get my parents on board, but once we went for it, I mean, it got me in shape. Used to be a lot heavier than I am now, but the discipline was there, and I've just always been passionate about sports. Always kept me grounded, and it's why I really like this idea that we have when it comes to NX1 and like really helping people in sports get their next opportunity, help with their branding, their marketing. I mean, even like getting them into D1 sports and D3, D2. I mean, however athletes can really expand their careers is all what we're about. And I mean, a little bit of my side on like the entrepreneurship space. I mean, I tried dabbling in drop shipping a little bit when I was younger, like 16, 17, back during COVID when that was like a prominent thing. And I've always wanted to like you were saying, Keaton, just like not working for anybody, just like really being that decision maker. Like, here's what goes, like really working for myself. It was just like, after working for Target for a little bit, like no disrespect to anybody who works there, or like works retail. I personally, I realized after that, it's just I have to be in a position where I can make decisions for myself, not having like a manager looking over me and really telling me like you got to do this, you got to do that, and especially a key point that you were talking about that like I also agree with 100% is like just giving back. And like I feel like when we create our own thing, really diving down into helping athletes like get where they want to go, that's like our way of like giving back. And like that comes in all shapes and sizes and like a bunch of different forms. Like sometimes it's in donations from people and sometimes it's like another way, but for us that's really just like helping our community and like a place that like we have experience in. So that's,
Hmm.
yeah, that's a little bit
Yeah,
about
no,
me.
I definitely second that. I love what we're doing. For those of you who don't know, me and Jay are freshmen at the University of Oregon, and we are starting NIL, basically marketing company. So
Yeah.
that's
And
why we're here.
getting a little bit into that, actually, I think it would be funny for the viewers to know exactly like what happened when we first met. Because like obviously you were saying it about a little bit. We were roommates, and so like we had. I know we talk about this all the time, but like we had a phone call for like 2 hours. Like the after we first met, and like we immediately knew we wanted to create like a business, and like entrepreneurship was something that we were going to bond over. We didn't know it was going to become this, and we didn't know like it was actually going to become a real thing, quote unquote, to speak. But like we knew immediately that like there was some like connection there for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think like also we just, you know, we knew we wanted to do something. We didn't really know exactly what. I mean, we tried a few things and they didn't
Yeah.
all work out. So,
Hmm.
but here we are. I think, I mean, to this day, we're still trying and just
Yeah.
trying to see what works and what doesn't work.
Exactly.
Um,
So just getting on to the next thing and like experimenting, getting over obstacles. And I mean, that's what we're all about. And we hope to share like in our second podcast, like how we're getting over these obstacles and what drives us. But for now, I think like we should just get it straight into like, why are we doing this? Like, why is it important for us to like really help these athletes and experiment with their branding and NIL? Like, obviously we've identified a problem, but some other people might not know what like NIL is and why it's a big factor and why it's a problem. But like, yeah, let's just get straight into that. Let you
I
start
mean,
off.
honestly, I think a big question too is why are we doing this on a Sunday when,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, it's all about the drive. I think that's the
exactly.
one thing that we forgot to really talk about ourselves that, Jared and I are very big on really, just, you know, being ourselves and also
Yep.
just when we have a goal in mind, we're gonna do it.
There's
Um,
tons of opportunities in college, and like we knew this going in. We talked about it on our phone calls where it's like we have the option to like either, go out and party every day or like really do it like college kids would normally do on a day-to-day basis. But like you were saying, we're here on a Sunday. We've been working and grinding through something called an Oregon Innovation Challenge, and like that really helped us like make our PowerPoints and get our business plan together. And that was something that we had to do like weekly on weekends. And like we just spent so much time grinding in the dark. And and now that it's like finally coming into the light and like everybody's seeing it, like it's like, wow, this is like NX1. This is such a cool thing. But it's like most people don't know how much time we spend in the dark, like grinding on this thing.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's a good point. I think like also like that's kind of like why we're doing it is because sometimes we like to do things like when no one like we like to do, work that, isn't always like pretty work or
Yeah.
whatever and just hustling
Mm-hmm.
when no
Yeah.
one's no one's watching. I think that's really what it means to be an entrepreneur. It's just like doing what's not like expected of you, but you're doing it anyways because you want to do it.
Yeah, it's all about that self-driven, self-discipline. It's just all about like what you can do and what you want to do because anybody can be an entrepreneur. You just have to have the right mindset. And I agree with you 100% on what you said. I think that also like goes into the point that we should like kind of address next is like us as athletes. Why did like we come up with this idea to like really like help with branding and NIL? Because like we were talking about before, we were both athletes in high school and like middle school and like above and beyond, and like we came up with this idea because like we would have enjoyed it if we were still in high school. And so like let's get a little bit into that and like how we really like dove into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think really what the idea was is like what Jared was saying is that we had a competition at our school and we had to come up with an idea. And so we just started jotting notes down of like what we wanted to do. And um, we were really just thinking about something that me and him would actually like to do and like to deal
Mm-hmm.
with. Because at the end of the day, I think that's also a really key important piece of starting business is you're going to spend a lot of time on it. And you got to make sure that whatever your business is that you actually like what you're selling.
Yeah.
And I think it's like equally cool if you've been in a position that you're trying to target. And I think that's why we really are focusing on targeting like like high school students in terms of the NIL space because we were just there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree with you more. I can say personally, it's just like when we were first going over this idea, just like you were saying, the spark was always there. We've always been passionate about this. And like when we were originally thinking about business ideas, like we haven't mentioned this yet, but we were originally planning on doing like this homeless, like something that had to do with the homeless and like making a business about that. But at the end of the day, like we wanted to give back, but we didn't know the proper way to give back that worked for us. And it turns out like we weren't too passionate about that sector, and it just wasn't meant to be. But like as soon as we started addressing sports, we knew when we were like coming down and writing ideas that like if we were really going to take this 100% seriously and like spend all our time into it and like really like care about it, I guess is the word. It's like we can create anything we want, but if we're not going to like invest our time and like really care about it on like a deeper level, then there's no reason to create it in the first place. And that's like kind of where the NIL started. That's where the sports idea started. And yeah, and can definitely say as like when I was back in high school, and I think this was the same for you, Keaton. It's like when we were talking about this, it was like, well, what would we have wanted in high school that like didn't exist at the time? And definitely when it came to the branding side, nobody was there to like to kind of like put their hand out and say, you know what,
Yeah,
this is
like
what you
guide
should be
you.
doing. Yeah, like nobody was there
Yeah,
to say, hey, this is what you should do on your Instagram, or this is what you should do in terms of like when you're reaching out to companies. Here are some companies that like you can look at that maybe are in your field of like maybe if you're a big like food guy, here's a food truck that might want to like work with you, or like if you're big into like sports like wearables, like maybe here's a sleeve company that like would be really interested in partnering with you. Schools don't really like offer that connection. And like even like third parties, like when I'm doing my motorsport, it was like not affiliated with the school, but it was like all third party. And like even in that sector, it's like nobody's there to like kind of like be a mentor and say like, hey, here's how you can get into this sector. Well, it was all like I had to do my own YouTube research. I had to
hmm
like network with these companies that like have never heard of me, and they've also never worked with anybody in the field that I was in, and I was already set back like before I even started. And I like with our target market of like these obviously like these D1 guys who are always getting these deals, they have no problems with that because like they have
yeah.
that hand supporting them. They know that they're going to be getting the money. But these D2 guys, these lower D1 guys, these D3, these high school guys, it's like they were in our position. Like they didn't have the tools to like really grab onto those resources. And that's what like I think that's what it was all about. We just want to like give them that guiding hand, and I think we can definitely do it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think you also bring up like an interesting question that like, do you think like because those D1 athletes have such a big following on social media that that's really why they get to that next level? Like, I mean, there's
Yeah.
probably certain aspects of it, but there's definitely some really good athletes that I've at least played with who never like were ever found or scouted. I
Yeah.
mean, take Tyrese Halliburton for example. I mean, a zero-star recruit, and then he just came out of Iowa State and became an NBA All-Star.
It's a
Um,
great comparison actually because I think a really good person to compare him with would be Mikey Williams from LA, and like he had some trouble with the law recently, and like he got dropped from Memphis. I don't know if he's back there or not anymore, but like he had a mansion in San Diego from NIL in high school for like 1.3 million dollars, but that was all from his social media following. Like yeah, he was a good basketball player, but was he really as good as like a Tyrese Halliburton or like maybe some really good guy from a smaller school that just didn't have the exposure? We won't. I mean,
mhm.
we don't really know because I mean, it's a terrible situation for him. He's probably not going to make it to the NBA anytime soon. But like, just the difference in NIL value that like you see in like a big market territory like that for a guy who maybe isn't up to par as someone else who's like in a lower market, that's like kind of what we're all about. Is just like making sure that Tyrese Halliburton gets the same opportunity that Mikey Williams guy does as well. So that was a good point. I
Yeah.
like that.
Y- Yeah, no, I think it's a good question to ask, and I think that's really the problem we're trying to solve is that like, you know, the little guy. We're looking out for the
Yeah.
little guy. And I think also like from my personal experience of playing soccer in high school, we didn't always like there was you're just gonna play high school, that was it. I mean, and I like as a freshman I aspired to play in college at whatever level I could. But in doing so, you end up paying for all these different like recruitment sites, and
Yeah.
it doesn't end up following through because the schools that are really looking at you are just private schools. And if
Hmm.
they are, they're probably like a D3.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's hard because, you know, when you have smaller schools looking at you, or if it's a private school and they can't offer you that much money, it can get definitely hard to keep going. And
Yeah.
for what happened to me was I was like deciding, do I go to a big university and focus more on my education or do I go and play soccer for a smaller school? And so
Hmm.
I ended up deciding to go to a bigger university and focus more on my education. But I think that's a problem that a lot of students definitely deal with, especially in the high school space,
Yeah.
especially with like recruiting, because there isn't really just one way to get recruited. The best way
Yeah.
to definitely get recruited is getting in contact with coaches, but
Yeah.
even then it's a long shot because they might not respond to you for like a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And the communication to the whole sports field is definitely crucial. And I think that's really where our story like originates from. I don't know if you want to add on to that, but
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree with you. It's like these athletes, and especially like even though what I was doing wasn't like necessarily affiliated with like a high school, and obviously like you're not going to see motorsport teams at like a D1, D2, or D3. I mean, funny story, like USC does have a F1 team, and all these others, like some small schools have like these programs, but like in like these third party situations, it's almost like super comparable because you get out there and you have like these top guys who like are spending like $100,000 a year, like really like putting money into their cart and like, getting, because it's a money sport. It's kind of like equestrian. It's like if you have the best resources, no matter how much talent you have, you're not going to be able to compete with that level. And like, I don't come from like a shit ton of money. And so, like I wasn't using the best, like I didn't have the best resources, but I made the most that I could out of it. But the problem with that is like all these brands and all these companies that like are willing to sponsor, they just see these top guys and they're like, well, this guy must have the talent because like he's getting like third places all the time. He's like winning regionals, but it's like sometimes it's just down to the equipment and like no matter how much you like prove that your skills there, like just placing like 10th or ninth is not going to cut it. But there are these other sites that like they would tell me in motorsport to like really go into, and it basically be like you can partner with them and you get a percentage like discount on their products. But there was never like a point where no matter how many companies I would like reach out to and no matter how many emails I would send, I would almost never get a response back. And if I did get a response back, it was one of those like customary, like, hey, thanks for reaching out. Like, I'm never going to like respond back again. I just wanted
yeah.
to like, put it out there. I'm sure you got in a lot of those before. But, like, what I was going to say was like tying this back to like how D3 and like D2 schools work, where it's like, even when you get into a D3 or a D2 school, like they promise you, like, yeah, you'll get a roster spot, like we're here for you and all that stuff. But like I mean, I learned in my sports business class, and I didn't actually notice to begin with, but D2 schools barely offer scholarships, and
Yeah. Well,
D3
they can't.
schools,
They actually
yeah, they
can't
can't.
offer
No,
scholarships.
they can
It's all
offer
just
like
like
some, but like
academic
they can't offer, yeah,
scholarships.
just very few. And then D3
Yeah,
can't offer any at all. And so, like, even though these coaches are saying that, like, yeah, we'd love to have you play on the roster, like, you have a roster spot if you come here, you have to put all your funds together. You got to pay to come to school. It's not like a D1 where, like, you can say, where a coach comes up to you and they're like, yeah, you know what? We want you
you
on
get
the
a full
roster.
ride.
Here's a full
Yeah.
ride. It's the exact same thing as like motorsport, where it's like you got to pay to play. And it's like at that point, it's really hard for like obviously like you were in that position. You chose to just come to school and play intramurals when you can, but there's other people who choose the opposite. And I mean, I love that they're so dedicated to the sport, but it's also just hard financially to like really accept that fact that you're going to have to pay to play. And that's what we hope to like kind of levy out a little bit.
Well, not only that, but you're also paying to be an athlete. So, I mean, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
student athletes definitely have busier schedules than normal students. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, they're paying to basically take a cut in classes, and
Yeah.
it's just like a lot of work for, I mean, it depends who you are. It's a lot of work for me, it was not as big of a reward as going to a well-known
Yeah.
university.
That
I
is
think
a, that
also,
is a, I was going to say that is a good point though when you were bringing that up, was just that at a D3 school you're basically paying just to have the same opportunity as a D1, but the difference between like all that hard work is that you basically levy that out as a D1 athlete, that you get to come here for free. And so like all this hard work is like for that
it's your
tuition.
job.
It's
Yeah.
your job. But like at
Yeah.
D3, you have to do all the work a normal student would do and all the extra
Hmm.
work, and they don't treat you any differently as a D3 like coach would treat a player than a D1 coach would treat a player. It's like the exact same thing you're doing
Yeah.
all same hard work. You just have to actually pay to come here, and
Well,
that's
because it's just as real, it's just at a smaller
yeah,
scale, right? And they have less
yeah,
money to give out. And I know since some of my, people in my class, they definitely went to the smaller schools to play football or whatever, and they got a few grants and they got a few academic scholarships, even though it was literally for football. That's
yeah.
how they, do that kind of stuff. But it's
Hmm.
still like barely a dent into their college education. I mean, now given
Yeah,
that it's like a D3 or D2 school, it definitely like especially if it's in state, the tuition might not be as high, but still, I mean, if you're going out of state just to play for some small school, whether it be like on the East Coast or wherever, I mean, sometimes these
hmm,
people are paying a lot of money to
yeah.
go to college and play a sport, which is interesting.
The
So,
question I have for you is that, I mean, this is getting like a little bit off like the main topic, but when it comes to like going to like these D3 and D2 schools, do you find that like there's almost like a misbalance of like when you're paying to come to a D3 and D2 school to like play soccer, like play football or play basketball, and since you're actually paying for your education, you can't like really get as much as you want out of it because you're so dedicated to your sport? Do you find that like it's like people who go into those D3 and D2 schools, like unlike D1, where like maybe you have a major chance at making it pro, even though it's like only 2% of people
yeah.
get it. Like you sacrifice all your education that you would normally be getting if you went full time as a student. And instead, you're like playing a sport in a D3 school, and maybe you're not getting that education how you hope for, and you're still paying the same price. Was that like something you considered when you were
Yeah,
like,
definitely. I mean, I think also the other thing that I considered and that my brothers like considered too was like, well, you go to these schools and you get to know like maybe like a few people, but at the end of the day, like someday if you're sitting in a job interview, do you want to be like known for going to a school in the middle of nowhere and saying
yeah,
that you played sport, or do you want to be like, look, I went to the University of Oregon, let's say. Most of the
yeah,
time, people are going to know what Oregon is or that bigger name. And so
yeah,
that's really what was the big difference, the big eye opener that my dad told me about.
hmm,
Is that like at the end of the day, a lot of people do pay for name, kind of the same idea of going back to, those top 17%. I mean, there's like a bottom, like, 83% of
yeah,
those schools, right? Like, so
hmm,
it's, but only like a very small increment is like that top D1 level of a
yeah,
program. And so I think it's definitely the connections are the biggest key part to going to a bigger school. I think that's definitely the most beneficial thing you could get out of it. And I
yeah.
mean, I don't regret any decision I made. So,
Yeah, no,
uh,
I'm glad we're both here. It worked out for the best. And I think that's a great segment into just why high school NIL is going to be so important. Because, I mean, these guys who would be considering D2, D3, or lower D1 opportunities, they still have the right to like profit off of their own name, image, and likeness in high school and maybe get some money to help like fund their college careers if they decide to go that route. Like, what do you think about that?
yeah, I mean, honestly, the biggest takeaway I get from this is that when I was a senior in high school, like I was the captain of the varsity soccer team, and I would have been loving to like be able to like do a little quick job on the side. Because in
Yeah,
a reality, I mean, if you did that instead of, like most of these athletes have part-time jobs, right? Like in high
yeah.
school, I worked a part-time job 3 of the 4 years I was in school.
Hmm.
And so to do that and a sport at the same time was very
It's hard.
difficult.
Yeah.
Um, it was also hard to like manage my time with friends, and
Yeah,
then school. And then yeah, it was difficult. I mean,
yeah, no,
for me,
100%. I was gonna. I mean, sorry for jumping in, but I was just gonna
yeah,
say. On top of that, like even with like my motorsport stuff, it got to the point where it's like my high school just refused to work with me, and it was like you had
yeah,
to pick between your sport or like the school, and ultimately at the end of the day, I thought that I was. I mean, it ended up working out for the best since like I am like I'm really good with like my time and like just getting to like where I need to go and like really diving down into things I'm passionate about. So like I didn't necessarily like need the authentic school experience to like really teach me about like where I need to go in life. I was able to get that from like third party sources and learn myself. So I opted to like just go to online school and like continue the sport. But it's like these, I mean, but like you were saying, it's like school and sports don't give you enough time to like really get it like another job on the side. It's like really hard. So getting this high school like NIL and getting deals and helping to make money so you don't have to get that part-time job is a huge
Y-
thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like learning after learning so much about it, it definitely makes me jealous and wish that I could go back and literally like,
Yeah.
really try to find NIL deals, even though like it's not legal in Wisconsin still. It definitely would have been nice to been able to be like, yeah, well, I did a photo shoot with this person for like 20
Yeah.
bucks, right? Like a little money here and there would have been nice. I think
Hmm.
also like it feels good when you are, it's definitely a sense of pride too when you're representing more than just
Yeah.
yourself. You're
Hmm.
representing like, your school, your family, or whatever. It's definitely like pretty cool to be able to be like, look, that's like what I did.
Yeah. Well, it feels nice that like a company or brand values you as a person. Because I feel
Yeah,
like that's what it's all about as well. It's like you put all this work into your sport. Like I put so much work into motorsport, you put so much work into soccer. It's like if a brand comes out to you or like wants to work with you and they're willing to put like your name on their stuff and have you represent them, like they believed in you as much as you believed in yourself. And so at
exactly.
the end of the day, that like means more to me than like the like honestly the money. But
That's
like
right. I
so
completely agree with you.
yeah, I mean the money's nice, and like we were just talking about with like not having to get part time jobs, like I'm jealous of it as well. I wish it was legal back then, and I knew about it because I think NIL was just coming out in Los Angeles in high school, but like I didn't like, know about it. I didn't know that that was something.
Well, I mean, I think
I
that's the reality is that I don't
yeah
think a lot of kids even know about it.
no, and that's what
I,
we hope to do. We hope to
yeah,
educate them, and
I mean, I don't think many people even know how to utilize their NIL value. I mean,
yeah,
unless you're like a big shot, like unless you're like the top 1% of people
yeah,
who have millions of followers
uh
and
huh.
they've just been doing brand deals their whole life. I
But
mean,
the
if you're
difference
not that,
is I was gonna say the difference is that like people are coming to them to inform them about NIL.
exactly.
Like
Yeah. It's
so,
not the other way
yeah.
around.
Hmm.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that's
no,
interesting.
yeah, 100%. And so, like, when it comes to like these lower athletes and like these high school athletes who have nobody to like tell them about it unless they reach out, it's like I didn't know about it at the time, and I know all my friends didn't either. And I mean, they all went to their college opportunities. One of my friends ended up playing hockey in college, and I mean, like, he still had to pay to play for a little bit, but I mean, is if you can get any profit at the high school level or even like just make these connections with brands, I think that's the most important part is just building a relationship with the brand. Because like you might not be making the most amount of money in high school once like NIL becomes this big thing in high school. Like these are going to be small deals, maybe like 200, 250 at most for like an endorsement or whatever. But think about it this way, if you were going to build that relationship, like you started working with them in like your junior year of high school and
Hmm.
they come back to you in like junior year of college after like you made that much more progress in your sport, like that loyalty, that brand loyalty that you had after doing the job in the first place, they're probably going to offer you a shit ton of more money. So
Yeah, or just offer you the job or get your foot in the door.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. For
Because
sure.
I think that's another issue is that like the problem is that like these even D1 athletes have this problem, like they spend their whole college career of just being an athlete, right? Because that's a
Yeah.
job
Hmm.
and that they don't actually get enough like proper like education on like career, like they don't have time. They physically don't have
Yeah.
time to look for jobs. And so then they end
Hmm.
up just struggling coming out of college, which is too bad.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's why you see a lot of these like part-time like retail jobs or fast food jobs. Like a lot of athletes get those because like physically nobody's there to help them get these like corporate internships or whatever that you see like these normal students getting who like have the time and have the patience to work through it. And I mean, it's super unfortunate. That's not right and that's not how it should be. But
I mean, but that's another key part to NIL. That's why it's so
yeah,
cool is that it gives these students while they're famous, their
Yeah.
4 years of fame for, wherever they're at to be able to make their money and then not have to work, maybe take a gap year in between college and, business and be like, look, this is what I made and we're
Yeah.
gonna like look for another job. I think that's really another key part to it all too.
Yeah, not
But
only not only that resume booster, but it's like, what if that brand had like that? I mean, like something good to say about you, had that connection. Like, if they couldn't offer you a job there as like some like ambassador to like mentor the other ambassadors that they end up offering NIL to, like maybe another company would be interested in taking you on as like that ambassador oversighting role of like NIL. Like, this is a whole new industry that we don't really know how it's going to affect like the space at large on the brand side. Like, I mean,
mhm.
we keep on talking about these athletes in like high school and how this is opening up and it can make them more money, but it like that was a good point when you mentioned it. It's like we don't know how this is going to affect the corporate side of like how these athletes might find jobs if like their career doesn't go pro. Can they find a job at these companies dealing with the NIL space, like with recruitment? That's something we haven't like really looked into and something we might talk about later down the line in other podcasts. But I mean, it's just something to think about for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Let's wrap it up and
Yeah.
we'll call it a podcast and
Hmm.
we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah. Next week, stay tuned, guys.